As a physician of the soul, I have never been concerned with judging morality in the conventional sense. Rather, my task has always been to understand the inner dynamics that govern human behavior, those invisible forces that rise from the unconscious and shape the course of a man's life. What we call unacceptable is not always evil. It is often simply unconscious. It is that which we have not yet faced in ourselves. The shadow, that hidden counterpart to the ego, holds not only our primitive impulses, but also the very parts of ourselves we need to become whole, and yet, when the shadow is denied, it acts out through projection, repression, neurosis, and the quiet destruction of what we love most. There are certain patterns of behavior that I have observed to be particularly damaging, not because they break societal rules, but because they arrest the soul's development. They disrupt the delicate balance of the psyche and block the process of individuation. These behaviors are not to be condemned, but to be understood as symptoms of an inner fracture, as cries for integration. In what follows, we shall examine 7 such behaviors. Let them not be taken as commandments, but as mirrors, reflecting back to us the hidden face of the self we have yet to embrace. Repressing the shadow in every human being, there lies a hidden realm, what I have called the shadow. It is composed not only of our primitive instincts and morally questionable urges, but also of qualities that are simply incompatible with our conscious self-image. These repressed contents, far from disappearing, form a potent complex that dwells in the unconscious and influences our life from behind the veil of awareness. Repression of the shadow is a universal psychological reflex, particularly in civilized society. From an early age, we are taught which traits are acceptable and which are shameful. In order to belong, to be loved, to survive, we disown vast portions of our psychic totality. Anger is frowned upon, so we learn to smile. Envy is unbecoming, so we congratulate through gritted teeth. The child who once screamed in frustration is now an adult who carries a silent, seething resentment. But what is not made conscious does not simply vanish. It festers in the depths and begins to exert pressure. It appears in dreams, in projections, in moments of unexplained rage. When we repress the shadow, we do not eliminate our darkness. We give it autonomy. The shadow becomes autonomous when denied. It acts without our consent, because we have abdicated our responsibility to integrate it. You see, it is not evil per se. The shadow is part of our wholeness. It holds not just the bad parts, but also the passionate, creative, instinctual energies we need to be fully alive. The tragedy is that repression turns this energy into poison, and it erupts when we least expect it. I have said before, what we do not make conscious appears in our lives as fate. This is not merely poetic. The repressed shadow will orchestrate accidents, sabotage relationships, and manifest as the very chaos we most fear. The individual becomes mystified by his own behavior. I don't know what came over me, he says, but it was not what came over him. It was what has always lived within him, exiled and enraged. The work of psychological growth, the process I have called individuation, requires the painful, courageous confrontation with the shadow. We must withdraw our projections. We must own what we have cast away, not to indulge it, but to understand it, not to be consumed by it, but to redeem the power it holds. The man who integrates his shadow becomes not dangerous in the vulgar sense, but powerful in the ethical sense. He no longer pretends to be purely good. He becomes whole. He chooses goodness, not from ignorance of evil, but in full consciousness of it. That is the only kind of morality that is not a mask. To deny the shadow is to live half a life. To face it is to step into your full humanity. Projecting unconscious content, one of the most perilous habits of the unconscious mind, is projection. Projection is not a sin, but it is a fundamental misunderstanding of the self. It is the act of unknowingly attributing to others what we refuse to accept within ourselves. This psychic phenomenon is not deliberate, it is automatic, often invisible to the individual, and yet it governs so much of our experience, especially in our closest relationships. What you do not own in yourself, you will see in others. The repressed anger you deny will be discovered in your partner's tone. The need for control you cannot admit will suddenly appear in your boss's decisions. The distrust you carry from childhood will be projected onto every friend and lover who enters your life, and you will believe it is them, always them. Projections. I wrote, change the world into the replica of one's own unknown face. This is the tragic beauty of projection. It paints the outer world with the colors of our inner landscape. We are deceived not by others, but by our own unintegrated psyche. We imagine we are dealing with reality, when in fact we are interacting with our reflection. Let me be clear, the act of projection is not merely an error of thought. It is a defense, a way the ego preserves its limited self-image. If I am to believe I am kind, I cannot allow myself to see my cruelty. If I am to believe I am strong, I must exile my vulnerability, but the psyche will not tolerate such division. What is disowned does not die, it travels, and so the shadow is cast, not inward, but outward. The individual becomes filled with judgment, suspicion, blame. He may hate with a righteous fury, never suspecting that he is fighting himself in another's body. She may flee from conflict, believing herself to be innocent, unaware that her passivity is its own form of aggression. Projection distorts the truth. It poisons intimacy, it erodes trust, and above all, it stalls growth. For as long as you remain trapped in your projections, you are blind to your own unconscious. You cannot heal what you have disowned. You cannot change what you have externalized. This is why I urged my patients to withdraw their projections, not in shame, but in curiosity, to ask, not why is he so critical, but why does his criticism wound me so deeply? Not why do they abandon me, but why do I expect abandonment? In this way, projection becomes a mirror, not a prison. To reclaim your projections is to begin the work of individuation. It is to move from reaction to reflection, from blame to responsibility, from illusion to truth. When we make the unconscious conscious, the image we have of the world softens. We no longer need enemies, idols, or scapegoats. We begin to see others not as carriers of our wounds, but as companions in the shared journey of becoming. And that, my friend, is the beginning of wisdom. Clinging to the persona, there is a mask we all wear. I called it the persona, the role we play in society, the face we present to the world. It is necessary, of course. Civilization demands order, and without a persona, we would be unable to function. We could not hold jobs, maintain relationships, or move within the social fabric. The persona is not inherently false. It is simply partial. The danger arises when you forget that it is a mask. When you become the persona, when you mistake the social role for the totality of your being, you imprison yourself in a two-dimensional reality. The persona, I wrote, is a semblance, a two-dimensional structure. It is not the full architecture of your soul, it is merely a surface. Too many individuals cling to their personas as if their lives depend on it, because psychologically they do. They confuse praise for love, performance for worth, appearance for truth, but to live solely through the persona is to live on borrowed identity, and borrowed identity always exacts a cost. The cost is depth, the cost is authenticity. The cost is the soul. When the individual over-identifies with the persona, he begins to sculpt himself to meet the expectations of others. She becomes a performance, a mirror reflecting what the world wishes to see. And slowly the true self, the deeper inner wholeness, fades into shadow. The man who appears endlessly confident may in fact be haunted by deep insecurity. The woman who seems tirelessly composed may carry a well of unacknowledged grief. But the persona allows them to avoid this discomfort, to be admired instead of known, and so they become strangers to themselves. This clinging is not just emotional, it is existential. For many, the persona is their only known self. To loosen its grip feels like death. They fear, if I am not what others expect, who am I? But this fear is the threshold to transformation. The moment one begins to question the mask, the path to individuation opens. You see, the persona is meant to be a servant, not a master. It must be worn lightly, like a garment you can remove when you enter the sacred space of the inner life. If you do not question it, if you never retreat from the applause, the likes, the titles, you become a fiction written by others. Individuation demands that you remove the mask, not all at once, not recklessly, but deliberately, with reverence for the deeper self behind it. You must ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I desire when I am no longer performing? Only then can you move from imitation to authenticity, from persona to person. Do not cling to the mask. Let it crack, let it fall, and in the silence beneath applause you may hear, for the first time, the voice of your own soul. And that voice, though quiet, is real. Avoiding suffering to suffer is human, but in the modern world we are taught that suffering is an error, a malfunction to be eliminated, avoided, numbed. Yet I tell you, there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Pain is not the enemy, it is the threshold. You see, suffering is not simply a punishment dealt by fate. It is the soul's cry for growth, for recognition, for transformation. When one flees from suffering, one also flees from the possibility of becoming. This avoidance is not strength. It is stagnation dressed in comfort. Many individuals, when faced with discomfort, recoil instinctively. They distract themselves with pleasure, work, achievement, or superficial pursuits. They refuse to look at the wound, but the psyche is not deceived by this escape. What is repressed does not disappear. It festers, it twists beneath the surface, and it returns, often as neurosis, compulsion, or self-sabotage. Avoidance becomes a cycle. The same mistakes are repeated, the same relationships collapse, the same emotions flare, and the individual, blind to the source, asks, why does this keep happening to me? The answer lies not in the world, but in the inner refusal to suffer consciously. To suffer consciously, this is a concept most avoid, but it is central to the process of individuation. It means choosing to stay present with what is painful. It means entering the darkness with open eyes. This is not passive endurance, but active engagement, to ask, what is this suffering asking of me? What must die so that something deeper may be born? Often, suffering points to a conflict between the ego and the self. The ego clings to old patterns, to familiar illusions, while the self demands transformation. And in this tension, the pull between who we were and who we are becoming, pain arises. But this pain, if met with consciousness, becomes meaningful. I have said it before, neurosis is always a substitute for legitimate suffering. That is, when you refuse to suffer directly, the psyche will create symptoms: addiction, obsession, depression, distraction. These are often the soul's detours, created because the direct path was feared. The one who numbs their heartbreak with constant distraction has not spared themselves suffering. They have only prolonged it. The ungrieved grief, the unwept tears, the unspoken truth, These remain lost in repetition. Do not numb it or dismiss it. Follow it like a thread into the labyrinth of the soul. For at its center, you will not find punishment. You will find the possibility of wholeness. Seeking perfection over wholeness, there is a grave misunderstanding in the modern soul that life must be perfected, that one must be without flaw, without contradiction, without darkness to be worthy of love or peace. This, I have found, is not only a dangerous illusion, it is a sickness of the spirit, a spiritual neurosis. Perfection is the ego's ambition. Wholeness is the self's calling. You see, the psyche does not seek to become flawless. It seeks to become whole, and wholeness includes everything: the light and the shadow, the noble and the shameful, the capable and the broken. To pursue perfection is to deny half of your soul. Wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integration of the contraries. This is the truth I have observed in every patient, in every dream, in every symbol that emerges from the depths of the unconscious. The person obsessed with perfection lives in a state of war with themselves. They repress what they fear, deny what they dislike, and project what they cannot accept. They wear a mask, a persona of virtue or success, while their inner life becomes a battleground of shame, anxiety, and disconnection. Perfectionism is the refusal to be human. Let us consider the example of the parent who longs to be perfect. They strive endlessly to be kind, patient, and selfless, but they suppress their frustration, their fatigue, their occasional resentment. In doing so, they create a false self, and eventually it cracks. They lash out or fall into despair or withdraw, not because they are bad, but because they have denied their fullness. When the ego seeks to sculpt a flawless identity, it rejects the shadow. And what we reject does not disappear, it grows in power. The denied anger returns as passive aggression. The hidden sadness leaks out in cold detachment. The disowned envy corrupts intimacy. This is the cost of chasing an image rather than embracing the truth. The self, that center of our psychic wholeness, invites not purity, but integration. To be whole is to say, here is my light, and here is my darkness. Here is what I love, and here is what I fear. I will not exile any part of myself. I will learn to carry it all with dignity. The journey to individuation requires you to relinquish the fantasy of perfection. It requires you to face the parts of yourself that you were taught to hide. It calls you to descend, not to become worse, but to become real. And paradoxically, it is in the moment you accept your imperfection that healing begins. It is in owning your shadow that you reclaim your power. It is in surrendering the need to be ideal that you become authentic. So I ask you, will you keep chasing an illusion that leaves you fragmented and exhausted? Or will you begin the sacred work of becoming whole? Controlling others, or life control, is the illusion of the anxious ego, the desperate attempt to impose order on what it does not understand. And yet the psyche, like nature, is not a machine to be mastered. It is an organic, living mystery that flows with its own inner rhythm. To control it is to deny its essence. The psyche is organic, not mechanical. It has its own rhythm. I have often said this, for it must be remembered. The soul does not respond to force, but to presence. It does not bloom in rigidity, but in reverent attention. When a person seeks to dominate others, or life itself, they are often not acting from strength, but from deep unconscious fear. Fear of abandonment, fear of chaos, fear of not being enough. To control is to shield oneself from the unpredictable, but in doing so, one also shuts out the possibility of genuine connection, spontaneity, and transformation. Consider the partner who attempts to control their beloved's every choice. Beneath this compulsion is not malice, but terror. a terror of being left, forgotten, or betrayed. But this control, meant to secure love, only erodes it. Love cannot breathe in the presence of domination. It requires trust. It requires freedom. Control is the language of the ego when it cannot trust the self, the totality of who you are, as not fear uncertainty. It welcomes it, for in the unknown lies growth, discovery, individuation. But the ego, fragmented and insecure, clings to the known, the predictable, the repeatable. It says, if I can keep things in place, I will be safe. And yet, this safety is hollow. It becomes a prison, not a sanctuary. To live fully, one must relinquish the fantasy of control, not recklessly, not without discernment, but with deep reverence for the mystery of life. You cannot force a flower to bloom. You cannot make another person love you by shaping them into your image. You cannot master the tides of the soul with plans and pressure. What you can do is become conscious of the inner forces that drive your need for control. Ask, what am I afraid will happen if I let go? What old wound am I trying to protect? What truth am I resisting? Often, the need to control is a legacy of trauma, where chaos once meant danger, and so structure became survival. But survival is not the same as living, and if you want to love, to create, to awaken, you must risk surrender. Control destroys not because it is cruel, but because it is blind. It cannot see the sacred unfolding that happens when we allow life to move through us, not around us. True power is not control, it is presence. It is the courage to stay open when the outcome is unknown. It is the willingness to be changed, rather than to always be in charge. So I ask you not to give up responsibility, but to give up rigidity. Let life speak to you in its own voice. Let love be free. Let your soul move, and you will find, perhaps to your great surprise, that when you stop controlling everything, the truth of who you are begins to emerge. These behaviors, though often labeled as unacceptable in common language, are not sins to be condemned, but symptoms of a deeper forgetting, the forgetting of the self. In my work, I did not speak of morality in the rigid, dogmatic sense. I spoke of wholeness. I spoke of integration. These destructive tendencies, projection, repression, control, perfectionism, do not arise from inherent evil, but from the soul's alienation from itself, from unawareness, from the fear of one's own depths. They are not to be judged, but understood. The greatest and most important problems of life are all fundamentally insoluble. They can only be solved by being outgrown. I wrote this not to confuse, but to illuminate. Life's most persistent struggles, our emotional wounds, our repeating patterns, our fears, cannot be resolved through force or logic alone. They are transcended through growth, through expansion of consciousness. To repress the shadow, to cling to the persona, to flee from suffering, these are not moral failures. They are stages on the path to individuation, and it is only through turning toward them, not away, that one begins to outgrow them. Dreams, symbols, synchronicities, these are not accidents. They are the soul's language. Through them, the unconscious speaks, not to torment, but to guide. When we learn to listen to our dreams, to our reactions, to our patterns, we begin the sacred work of transformation. You see, individuation is not perfection. It is not becoming good in the eyes of the world. It is becoming whole in the eyes of the soul, and this requires courage, the courage to face what is hidden, to embrace what was once exiled, and to live not from fear, but from the self. So if you find yourself repeating the same mistakes, sabotaging what you love, or fearing your own depths, do not despair. You are not broken. You are being called to turn inward, called to awaken, called to become who you truly are, and in that journey every wound becomes a teacher, every shadow becomes a doorway, every fall becomes a beginning. This is not easy work, but it is the most important work of your life. So walk gently, walk consciously, and remember, the path is not upward, but inward,